Well, hello everyone. Welcome to our webinar today. My name is Stephen Fite, and we are so excited to have you. Hope that the back to school season has been kind to you and that you have a classroom full of angels. But before we get to our webinar today, which will be advocating for play in the early childhood classroom featuring Dr. Brian Mullery, I'm going to share a quick little song with you, a quick little idea. This is a fun tune that you can put to use in your classroom. And it's actually a piggyback song based on going on a bear hunt, but we're gonna search for some letter sounds. So what you would need would be, of course, a safari hat, a flashlight. You could turn all the lights off in your classroom and place a word or two around your classroom on the wall somewhere and tell the kids that we're gonna go on a letter hunt. So let me start the music and I will give you an idea as to how this thing sounds.
Well, the shiver beat Timothy, ho, 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 it's a pirate's night for me.
We're going on a letter hunt. We're looking all around for a letter like this that has its own sound. We'll look over there. I think I see a word. It starts with our letter, a sound we've all heard. And here's our word. It starts with a B, and it sounds like this. Ba, ball, ba, ball, ba, ball, ba, ball. So just a fun little activity, getting us on the road to play and having some great imaginative experiences in the classroom, getting the children excited about play and excited about learning their letter sounds and word identification as well. So I will have these words as a PDF and the song that you just heard without my vocals, you'll have to provide your own vocals in the classroom, as a free download on my website at right here at melodyhousemusic.com. So just go to melodyhousemusic.com. When you get there, go to the products or shop, look for Stephen Fite Music, and later on today or tomorrow, hopefully, because I just threw this all together this morning, I will have that up there as a product, as a free download for you. All you have to do is just go to melodyhousemusic.com, click on Stephen Fite Music, and identify that product in there, download it free as a PDF and an MP3. So, well, let me get this crazy hat off. I am again excited to have you guys here today. We're going to have a wonderful, wonderful webinar featuring Dr. Brian Mullery, as he presents advocating play in the early childhood classroom. We all know that play is an essential part of every early childhood classroom. And it's a way that children learn so many skills before they move on. So, but before we do that, let me give you some EdWeb webinar tips to make sure that this is an extremely pleasurable viewing experience for you. If you have other applications that are open right now, we encourage you to close them because they will use some bandwidth. For audio issues, you can switch to phone by clicking more at the top of the screen. You'll see those three dots at the very top of your screen in the middle. Just click on that and you can switch to phone. For a larger view of the slides, you can hover over the slides and click the maximize image. And we would love for you to post your questions in the chat box off to your left, because I will be viewing those throughout the webinar, writing down some great questions for Brian, sharing them with him at the end of our webinar, and he will answer those questions for us. And if you're tweeting, we would love for you to tweet using hashtag #EdWebinar, hashtag #EdWebinar. If you are not a member of the Early Childhood Learning Solutions community as of yet, we would love for you to join. It is totally free, and it gives you so many different things that you can take part in. EdWeb webinar recordings and slides. You will be able to view all the past slides and webinars. You will be able to take those quizzes for CE certificates. You can join online discussions. There are a lot of free resources that come to you as being a member of the EdWeb webinar community. And we would love for you to join the Early Childhood Learning Solutions community today. So to get your CE certificate, all you will need to do if you're watching this live is wait 24 hours and it will come to the email box, the very email that you sign in with. If you're watching this as an archive, you will need to go and take the CE quiz. And again, you will receive that via email. One important point I want to share with everybody here is that your EdWeb webinar activity, if you have been a member for a while, is now available on your EdWeb home page. You will be able to go back and see all the webinars that you have watched. Look at all the different things that you have experienced, as you've been a member of the EdWeb community. So we encourage you to go back and check that new feature out. Well, our host is, of course, Frog Street Press. They have hosted this very early childhood learning solutions community for the past 3 years. And they have a wonderful, wonderful set of curriculums, a continuum of curriculum from birth age to 5. So we encourage you to go to frogstreet.com and check out that, plus all the other wonderful resources that Frog Street can offer you. Well, I am done here. My work is over. And I would love to introduce to you right now our speaker for the day for the next 55 minutes, Dr. Brian Mullery. Brian, take it away.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the webinar. I apologize that I am speaking to you via a phone. My microphone doesn't work currently at this time, so I hope everyone can hear me fine. I wanted to talk a little bit today and talk a little bit about a subject that is very dear to my heart, which is advocating for play in the early childhood classroom. And I have there my email address in case you ever have any questions that you need to send my way. That information will be available at the end screen, as well as we have that information that comes up at the last screen. Also, I want to talk to you a little bit today, just so that as you are participating in today's session, that you have a feel for where we're going and what I hope to accomplish today. We've done the introduction, but what we're going to do is try to accomplish 4 different points, looking at defining what play is and different approaches to play, understanding the research foundations that promote play as being a viable instructional venue for teaching literacy and mathematics and science, for that matter, in early childhood classrooms. We also will talk a little bit about particularly how to plan for and support children's play when it is not going the way it should, and some strategies and activities to sustain play and encourage it to be robust. Now, the reason why I'm talking about play today, and we'll be looking at defining play and different approaches to play, is the way that play is perceived in our public schools in particular. If you're a preschool teacher and you are trying to advocate for using play, and not just preschool, but what I'm particularly concerned about is kindergarten. Kindergarten seems to be a place where play no longer is an instructional way of teaching our curriculum, and that has a lot of consequences to it. And I think that one of the reasons why this is happening is because of the big demand for making sure that children are prepared for school, particularly that they're ready to enter first grade at various types of reading benchmarks. I am speaking from my past experience, not only as a researcher who has researched this topic in my dissertation, particularly looking at how curriculum has changed for kindergarten and in teachers planning and the way they prepare for curriculum, but also in terms of my experience in working as an instructional support specialist going in and supporting classrooms. And in those interactions, one of the things that I deal with on when I would go in and interact with teachers and additionally with their administrators was the issue that really there was no time for play because we needed to make sure that the children were prepared. And I think that one way that we need to start talking about play when we talk about advocacy is not just using words that now don't seem to have much leverage, particularly with administrators who aren't familiar with early childhood development, and that's what we're going to look at. So that's really what my goal is for today, is to give you the information that you need to really talk about play in a way that will help others who are concerned about how does play have anything to do with preparing my child for reading, for preparing my child for mathematics. What is it that I can do? This is what this session is for, is to provide you with that research base and that discourse to help you talk about it in a different way. If we start approaching administrators and maybe possible some parents who are concerned about play not being rigorous enough for children, we can get into difficulty using words like it's not developmentally appropriate, because that doesn't seem to carry much leverage anymore. And also when we say things like play is a way for children to learn, that's very true, but it doesn't help to communicate how it is that works through, or how that helps children to learn. So that's what we're talking about today. I want to talk about this, first of all, by looking at the different types of play. When I talk about play, I want to make sure that where play seems to be having the most friction is that when we talk about play, it seems that it's the antithesis of work, okay? And when you think about play, maybe you think about goofing off, or that it doesn't have any type of concentration or effort to it. And that's really what we're going to be talking about today. When we talk about the types of play that I'm speaking to, I want to dismiss this notion that play cannot be rigorous and that it doesn't require a lot of thinking, and that it doesn't require a lot of effort, because actually what we're going to be talking about, we will see that it does. And I want you to think about also in terms of your memory about your own childhood experiences with play. And think about the amount of time and the amount of effort and the amount of the way that you lost yourself in engaging in scenarios, particularly pretend play, that allowed you to concentrate for, think about even up to an hour playing a particular scenario that you go back and revisit. Maybe it was a game, whatever. It required you to put forth concentration and effort, and that's the way we want to approach that today. But there are three different types of play that I want to look at, which are, first of all, exploratory, constructive, and dramatic. The next slides will discuss what those are. When we talk about exploratory play, we're talking about when kids are tinkering around with something, and as they tinker around with something, they soon discover that it has some sort of, they discover a relationship or a cause and effect discovery that leads to other types of curiosity and inquiry that then leads to further inquiry. And as they keep on tinkering around with those things, they begin to develop they begin to develop hypotheses about, well, I wonder if I do this, I wonder if I do this. So even though exploratory play might not look very productive, it's productive in the fact that it allows children to really take time with thinking about and developing or developing a disposition for inquiry and for figuring out and understanding and going forth. Also, I went back too much. Another type of play that's very conducive to learning is constructive play. And constructive play being where children use objects, whether they be blocks, Legos, or whatever, to represent their thinking. And when you start thinking about constructive play, think about not only how exploratory play can lead to dispositions towards, becoming a scientist, manipulating different objects and so forth to see how they work. But constructive play can also be a foray into developing dispositions for becoming an engineer. So that is one thing to think about in terms of what we're talking about with constructive play. The last one I want to talk about is dramatic play. Dramatic play is different in that it really becomes a place of where you enter into this world of narrative, a pretend sort of situation that's imaginary. And actually, interestingly enough, exploratory and constructive play can lead to dramatic play as it becomes more robust and more intentional. So one of the things I want to talk about is that there are different approaches to play. The screen that I have in front of you right here kind of talks about the different ways that we can discuss how curriculums approach play. This is from one of the documents that I've uploaded to the website that's provides a research foundation for advocating for play in early childhood. And what we want to make sure is that somehow or another the curriculum that we use is pinpointed to meet children in that oval that you see there in the middle of the screen. So there are two different ways of approaching play. Sometimes you have curriculums that are it's a classroom-rich and child-initiated play, where the teacher takes in consideration more intentionally the interests and the pursuits that the child is doing. So the teacher is very aware of what the children are doing and then plans their instruction based on what the children are doing. The other end of that spectrum, on the other side of that, but still within the oval, is a playful classroom with focused learning. In this type of situation, you have more teacher-planned sessions where you're looking at more direct instruction, but there's still that between both of those scenarios, or both of those possibilities, there's still room for play to happen with both teacher and child-initiated scenarios for play to arise. So it isn't just one dominated by the teacher and one dominated by the child. What you see on the very opposite end, when you have child-dominated only, is a very laissez-faire, loosely structured classroom that can go into chaos. That's not what we're talking about. On the other end of that, you can have something that's so highly didactic and highly structured that the children have no agency or no voice to initiate some of their own interest into pursuing what it is that they want to do. So I've listed there some curriculums that you might be familiar with that are within that oval zone. High Scope is very child-initiated. Frog Street, other types of things that provide some focus for learning in terms of where the objectives are, also provide space within there for teachers to incorporate child-initiated play. But what we want to be careful for is not going off on both opposite ends. Also, one of the things I want to caution is that when we are supervising children or looking at what children are doing when they're playing, I want to say one word of caution that too much teacher intervention is not always beneficial. And I have here a scenario or a vignette from actual quote from children where a teacher is coming by to supervise the dramatic play that's going on. And the children, before she comes there, were heard saying, "Uh-oh, here comes Mrs. R. Now she's going to ask us, what are you playing? And then you have to answer." And then she just talks and talks and talks, and we can never finish the castle for Queen Wander. So what you see there are children here going, oh no, that's not really something that they don't really see a place where what the teacher's doing is connected into what it is that they're trying to accomplish. So we don't want to be too teacher dominated. So that's some of the things that we're going to talk about today as we go through. I want to really advocate one particular piece of literature that I think would really help teachers and help us in early childhood go forward with a conversation on how to provide a framework, an instructional framework where we can say that play is a viable form for instruction. And there are two researchers in particular, Elena Bedrova and Deborah Leong, who work at the University of Colorado in Boulder, who have worked with, have put together a program called Tools of the Mind. And it isn't so much it's very much provides a framework, and there's some curriculum ideas that they provide as well in their book, but it helps us to understand how play actually develops cognition and language development. And I have there on the screen that you can see Tools of the Mind. And I'm going to talk a little bit about this because they approach play through what we call a social constructivist lens. And I want to talk about what that means. Social constructivism, what you see here, I'm going to compare this between what a social constructivist is versus a behaviorist approach to learning. A social constructivist understanding of learning is that, let me first of all talk about behaviorism. Behaviorism is typically where we think that humans are totally under the control of their environment, that whatever we do, it's the environment that influences and has a significant influence on how we learn. And that's not necessarily wrong. But what a social constructivist does, on the contrary, is they believe that humans are able to respond to the environment. So in other words, humans have some agency, and they also are active participants in the environment. So they actually influence what is going on in the environment. And so one way to think about this is that humans, for example, what differentiates us from animals, I'm talking about cats, dogs, whatever, is that we have tools, and this is where it comes back to the idea of tools of the mind, that we have tools that help us to respond to our environment and to deal with the environment. And that's what I mean about us being active creators in our environment and impacting our environment. So think about a calendar. A cat isn't able to sit down and actively plan their time. They just kind of react to the environment as the environment happens to happen. Adults, on the other hand, can do things and create tools and so forth, like create scissors or whatever, that helps them to adapt to their environment. And that's something that really differentiates us between humans and other animals, is that we have this ability to use tools to work within the environment. And one of those tools that we do have is speech and thinking. And the behaviorist thinks about speech as being simply something that you have, we do this all the time when we say that we're talking to ourselves. Well, actually, it's not just talking to yourself, what we call silent speech. It's actually where speech is mediating your thinking in sort of a way to where speech actually helps you be more thoughtful in your thinking, and it actually influences your thinking. And so what we find is that with speech and language really beginning to merge at age 3, that learning can reorganize and qualitatively change the structure of our thought. And I'm going to say that if you think about it this way, that if you think about, have you ever been in a situation where you have, like you're writing that term paper, and you think to yourself, you have all the ideas in your head, but it isn't until you go through and actually have to put it down on paper and organize it and put it into some sort of structure that the language that you use to wrap around your thoughts actually changes the structure of your thought and makes it actually more coherent. That's the sort of approach that we're talking about, is this link between your thoughts and language, and play has an active role in that, and that's what I want to talk about. So again, I use this screen here to talk a little bit about comparing social constructivism to behaviorism. From a behaviorist standpoint, they believe, or the way that they approach learning, is that you just learn a concept, and then you learn another concept, then you learn another concept, and you learn another concept, and it's just cumulative. When we think about it from a social constructivist point of view, however, there's something about, it isn't just learning concepts, there's something about the process of learning itself that's significant. And those tools of the mind, if you so to speak, are things that we would call memory, perception, attention, and self-regulation. And so I'm saying that to say that, the more, if you have memory, if you have good memory, if you can pay attention to something, if you can regulate your behavior, the more inclined or the better disposition you are to learn that information. And you know how those of us who teach preschool, one of the things that we're dealing with is that young children don't come in with really strong memory. They're very small attention spans. And so the amount of information that they can learn in various chunks of time is very limited. And so if we can enhance memory, attention, self-regulation, and their ability to distinguish between the environment, things in the environment, which is related to perception, if we can enhance those tools of the mind, then we can increase their capacity for learning. So it isn't just a matter of teaching, it's a matter of increasing their capacity for learning. And we call memory, attention, self-regulation, and perception, those tools, those mediators, we call those executive level functioning skills. Maybe you've heard of executive level functioning. Executive level functioning plays a direct role in how well children come to school ready to learn. So if we come from it from that point of view, that what we're trying to do with play is to develop memory, perception, attention, self-regulation to enhance tools to increase the potential for learning, we can approach play as being a viable context for doing that. Because when we think about where developmentally our accomplishments are in childhood, and particularly at infancy, the major leading activity that we want to make sure happens when we talk about windows of opportunity and brain development, by infancy, the major leading activity in developmental accomplishment is emotional interaction with our caregivers. This is where we're building those attachments of trust, and also developing some basic perceptual skills. And so the developmental accomplishment in infancy is really about attachment and object-oriented sensory motor actions, how to manipulate things in the environment, how to move things closer to you, away from you. That is a major leading activity for infancy. When we move into toddlerhood, it really becomes more of looking at object-oriented activity, where this child is developing skills that help them to interact with the environment. So this is where they're increasing their sensory motor thinking and also their self-concept and understanding who they are in relation to their environment. But here's what you want to pay attention to. At age 3, something significant happens in the development of a child. At age 3, we start moving into preschool. At preschool, at age 3, you'll note that when children turn about 3, typically the amount of vocabulary that they have is at about 275 words. So by the time they reach 3, they should basically have typically 275 words. That's just kind of a rounded number. It's not, don't quote me on that, but that's what most of the research points to. Now, what happens, though, is that between age 3 and when they leave preschool going into kindergarten, that vocabulary has increased. It has increased from 275 words to 10,000 words. So you can see that within the preschool year, there's something significant that's happening. And what it is where the brain is now able to connect language to thought. And so this idea about using when children enter into the 3-year-old year, they develop symbolic thinking, which allows them to participate in make-believe play. And so really the idea here is, with a social constructivist approach to play, is that make-believe play is the scenario whereby children develop imagination, where they develop the ability to think symbolically, where they develop the ability to act, not off of just instinct, but on an internal mental plane of intentionality. Also where they're able to start integrating their thinking to their emotions, and also develop some self-regulation skills, such as monitoring their behavior, monitoring their emotions. And so what we're going to talk about in the next few slides is how it is that play really is this window of opportunity in the preschool year where make-believe play in particular allows those developmental accomplishments to take place. So by the time you are entering the elementary years, your leading activity in development is basically where you can be an intentional learner. So it's here where learning content starts to make sense. And so really then what I'm talking about is that, and again, going from what Bedrova and Leong are talking about is that play is the vehicle where we prepare children in preschool to be ready for school. And when children enter preschool, they're very reactive. They're dominated by their perception. They're focused on the most salient and often irrelevant characteristics of a situation. Think about when you're reading a book and you have children raise their hand and they come up with some sort of scenario about, let's say you're reading about the three bears and you ask a question and the child makes a comment that has nothing to do with the book. It has to do about whether or not if they went to Walmart last night. They're not able to attend to that and control their instincts to comply with what your agenda is. So preschoolers are very reactive, but there's something about play that transforms them into where they can learn on demand, focus on relevant details and information, and develop some metacognition, which is the ability. When you have metacognitive ability, which play develops, you're able to think about your own thinking. So let's talk about how play does that. Vygotsky, who is the lead theoretical guru who has helped us in early childhood think about where play is, shows different stages of play. Play is still important from 0 to 3, but it takes a different type of dimension. It's mostly about imitation, where the child repeats and imitates. And this is very important because remember, we're talking about at that infancy and toddlerhood is a critical periods of development is to be object-oriented and learn about themselves in relation to the environment. So imitation is an important level that the child will go through. Then in preschool in particular, and I'm talking about ages 3 through 5 up to 6 perhaps, where play begins to have a purpose and a plan. So it isn't just about interacting with the environment, it has a plan. And it teaches the child to delay their gratification and adhere to a set of rules like you be this and I be that. I'll be the doctor, you be the nurse. It also allows for oral language development, taking turns, compromising, and creating imagination through abstract thought. Now, what happens at school, when children enter first grade, children become a little bit more to where the pretend element starts to fade away, not necessarily altogether, but they begin to be more purposeful with their play, and they actually begin to engage where they're able to engage with games that involve rules. So in other words, board games where you have to draw a card and you go this many spaces and then you have an end goal that you're trying to do. Many times if you've ever seen preschoolers play games, they tend to invent the rules to the games as they make it up because they're not necessarily at that level of development to be intentional to go and comply with all those games altogether. So these next 6 slides I'm going to show you are actually really critical to this whole presentation. This is really where I think that you need to come to when you're thinking about how can I really advocate for play and convince someone that it really does help preschoolers develop and prepare them for school. And there are 5 different ways that I'm going to talk about that pretend play prepares children for learning. And one of them being the way that it creates what Vygotsky calls the zone of proximal development to support emerging skills, where it also facilitates the separation from action, thought from actions, where children can separate what they're doing from their actions, where it facilitates their self-regulation. It impacts their ability it impacts motivation with delayed gratification, and it also facilitates what we call decentering. So let's look and see what those actually are. When Vygotsky talked about play, he said that it was during that preschool year where children are actually able to, something happens at the preschool year where they get into a zone where they're willing to do things that they normally wouldn't do if they were being forced to do it. So let me put it to you this way. Think about that child who has difficulty sitting during circle time and attending with you. The child is playing with their shoes and so forth. They can't regulate. But that same child, when they're outside playing and they are pretend playing Batman and Robin, and they happen to be one of the villains and Batman kills them, and in order to play dead, think about what a 4-year-old would have to do to play dead. They would have to sit still. That same child who has trouble sitting on the carpet, playing with his shoes, is sitting there then in this other context of play where they're able to sit there, pretend, be still, and engage in their role and adhere to those type of rules. And the reason why they're willing to do that is because it's such a high interest situation that they want to adhere to those rules. So what we see happening is that children are indeed in their zone of proximal development. Vygotsky said that play for preschool, that for preschoolers in particular, is their zone of proximal development. And I have a quote here from Vygotsky from one of his books called Mind and Society, which he says that action in the imaginative sphere is, in an imaginary situation, the creation of voluntary intentions and the formation of real-life plans and volitional motives all appear in play and make it the highest level of preschool development. What he's saying is that play, when children are playing, they're at their best level of development. They're in the best context, in that best zone for learning where they're willing to take in and self-regulate. Another way that play facilitates learning is that it separates their thoughts from actions and objects, so they develop this symbolic thinking. So think about the 3-year-old who's able to take a cylinder and make that pretend to be a cup. So let's think about where that happens in regular development. That cup almost in a certain way then becomes like a symbol of cupness, that it holds something, but it's not really a cup. And so what happens is that children begin to think symbolically, which prepares them for thinking about things like how symbols actually represent letter sounds, okay? And then we also see that one of the ways that happens is through toys. So when children are playing with toys, if you look at the little boy down here, those toys act as a pivot where it triggers something, where maybe here this boy is thinking about a memory that he had of boarding a train. So what happens is he's beginning to think in the abstract. He's beginning to think of something that happened in the past. And this toy brings that up to his mental imagination. He starts to plan with it. So toys are very critical for helping children to move towards that direction, towards external action. It helps them to externalize their thoughts. And also, if you look at this picture here, at the little girl who's pretending to be Sleeping Beauty, again, this is a girl who doesn't like to take naps at preschool, but she's willing to pretend to be Sleeping Beauty when she's in the role of Sleeping Beauty, because that's a high motivational context for her to play. So you see her willing to self-regulate, to put herself through a little bit of pain to enjoy some of the benefits of her pretend play. And also, if you think about it, play really helps children defer it impacts their motivation. In other words, it helps children. In order to play, you have to postpone some of your objectives to build something. So let's say that you want to build a make-believe city. You have to actually do that, put forth the effort to plan all of that before you actually go through and play. So what happens is children are learning to delay their gratification versus something where you have something digital in front of you and you are being constantly gratified immediately because the digital world allows you access to just get that instant gratification right there and then. But play, on the other hand, causes you to have to, I'm going to have to put forth some effort. I'm going to have to plan. So again, think about how that's helping children begin to do project work, how they begin to plan for their essays when they go into middle school. When they think that, I've got a big project that's due, I'm going to have to do this, I'm going to have to do that, I'm going to have to do that. Begin to learn to plan and prepare for those. Fifthly, there's something that's very critical, and in particular to language, is that play facilitates decentering. When I'm talking about decentering, it's about entering into narrative. Now, when I'm talking about narrative, I'm talking about almost in the realm of literature, where children begin to think about scripts, being in different types of roles, what it would mean to put themselves into that character. So this is where children begin to learn to identify with roles in literature, where they identify with different types of characters, where they can kind of experiment being a doctor, what it means to be a doctor, what a doctor would say. So when we talk about using language that a doctor would use, and this is where children in particular it's very beneficial to use literature as a way to jumpstart that type of context where children can then, after they read a book, they can then pretend to be that character and start developing their own narratives around that. So it's very critical that children engage in that linguistically as well for narrative purposes and reading comprehension. Now, just a little bit of what I also want to reiterate is that research does confirm that play is beneficial. And what I have here is from the Alliance for Childhood 2009 publication, which is one of the publications that I've uploaded for you to download so that you can read and be more aware of what research is saying. But one of the things that they find is that children who engage in complex forms of sociodramatic play have greater language skills than non-players. They have better social skills. They have more empathy, more imagination, and more subtle capacity to know what others mean. And wouldn't that be nice in today's society if we can have children develop those type of skills in the workplace? And also, one of the things they find is that with animals that also engage in behavior, in play-like behavior, have larger brain structures, larger neurological structures in their brain. So it actually benefits children in their brains as well. Also, when something to note, though, is that when teachers support and scaffold play in a meaningful way, there is research out there that shows that it has effects, positive effects on children's literacy and their math skills. In particular, I want to pay close attention to the correlation between executive level functioning, which is in the second bullet down there. Executive level functioning being that skill of memory, attention, and self-regulation that has a very direct correlation to math ability and developing and being able to be good at mathematics. So let's talk a little bit about teachers supporting play and what they can do. Just simply put, there's 3 different ways that we can do this. We want to, whenever we sit down with children during group time or whatever, we want to help them think about planning their roles. Who are they going to be? The theme of the play and how the play will unfold. One way that teachers do this is by providing props. They also model that. One of the ways I've seen teachers do this is actually going into the Dramatic Play Center, putting on those props, talking about what those characters who wear those props or who use those props would do, and rehearse. Rehearsal is a very good thing to do for children in group type of work where you can have some sort of instructional format with it. And you also want children to think about what's going to happen, what will happen next. There's a lot of language that can come from this. Just anticipating that children will go and play by themselves in today's world where you're seeing a lack of play happening. And if you remember back when I was a kid, children spent all their time outside pretending, it seemed, and would be outside for 2 hours until mom called you in to go in to eat or whatever. And now you're seeing less of that and more TV and digital type of work where children are no longer interacting with each other. So they don't necessarily know how to play, so we have to think about how to support their play. And I've also listed here in this screen things that we can do. I have 9 different ways, again, that really we need to think about ways to help children in the classroom when they are playing. One of those is, I want to really reiterate here, is that at the beginning of the year in the preschool year, I don't think you're going to be able to have children playing up to 60 minutes of uninterrupted play with a particular pretend scenario. That is going to build with a little bit of coaching and also some stamina. And I'll talk a little bit about that as we go through. But we can help children plan their play, monitor and coach them as they go through, and think about, again, entering in and helping them when it's not going the way it should. One way to do that they've incorporated at some places, this is a book called Literacy Through Play from Gretchen Owocki, who talks a little bit about the way that teachers use play plans as a way of writing, where children will talk about their play for what they're going to do that week, and they develop some sort of a play plan of what they're going to be doing. And those play plans eventually become narratives and eventually even stories. So it provides a meaningful context for literacy exploration. And you can see here's a scribble play plan. Here is a drawn play plan where they're simply using pictures. A buddy play plan where they're planning together. And it eventually moves into more writing, where you can actually see that the children are being encouraged to use their what they know about literacy, letter formation, and so forth, to actually create narratives and text. So it has you can very intentionally connect literacy in with the play aspect of what we're talking about. And also think a little bit about how literacy enhances language. The different contexts that language requires, and I have here listed from Halliday what he talks about different functions for language. There are 7 different functions. One is instrumental, one is regulatory, one is interactional, one is personal, one is heuristic, the other is imaginative, and the other one is representational. I have there in red different types of way that language sounds like when children are doing that. If you look at the instrumental, regulatory, interactional, and also the imaginative, you can see where play really facilitates those language structures and helping move the language forward. Now, one thing, this is something I wish I had more time to really talk about, were the 5 stages in children's make-believe play. This is from Leon and Bedrova from Work, and this is a publication I've uploaded to the link that you will find at the end of the presentation that talks about the different stages that children go through to get to more robust and more developed types of play, where the learning will become absolutely incredible and self-sustaining if they get to level 5. And they call their stages what they call propels. And propel stands for the different ways that children develop in their play, which is as you go down vertically, where you see plan, roles, props, extended time frame, language, and scenario. Those are the different ways that children are developing in their play. And then at the very top, horizontally going across, you see the stages. First, scripts, roles, and action, roles with rules and beginning scenarios, all the way up to dramatization. And you can see how the first scripts are very limited types of development in play, what you typically would see at age 3, and what you would see children doing if they had an opportunity to be really involved in doing dramatic play. And look in particular where, number one, that it increases their ability to attend to something. When we look at the extended time frame, look at level 4. It says create scenarios that last 60 minutes or longer. This is, think about, this is children who are able to engage in something without you ringing a bell and changing them and directing them where to go. They can self-monitor for 60 minutes. And then eventually develops to a place where the play lasts all day and it can be revisited over several days. Think about that in terms of writing. If I am trying to develop a research paper or some sort of composition, those are the sort of attentive skills that I need children to develop when they're going into high school. I mean, yes, I want children to know letter sounds and all of those things, but play can provide a very robust context for developing those type of skills. So I've uploaded these stages in with an article that they created, that Bedrova and Leon created. It's called 5 Stages in a Child's Make-Believe Play, that's uploaded with this presentation that I want you to look in. And they provide a sample play scenario that I want to get into. You can kind of look at, this is a pretend play scenario with how a teacher is supporting pretend play. Here what you see is the teacher in the pictures. You can see that teachers have set up a pretend play scenario where they provide a lot of the props. But one of the things I want to encourage you by thinking is that sometimes those props are important at the beginning stages of play, but you want to eventually move to a place where you are not dependent on using props anymore, that the children are the ones who are developing those props. And that's where you can integrate in project-based learning, where children, if they're going to start creating play scenarios, can begin to work at centers, putting together, writing the passport. So here, for example, in the scenario that I provided from the article in Young Children, this is Miss Soto's preschool classroom. It's been turned into an airport. Now, the literacy center is a ticket counter, but notice that that's a travel agency that's been converted with child-made, not teacher-made, but child-made passports, tickets, and travel brochures. What you see over there in the picture is teacher-made. And also in the Block Center, the children have constructed a walk-through X-ray scanner from cardboard boxes. What you see over here is a teacher-created prop versus a child-created prop. So think about how involved children get as they begin to work into those projects and creating their own scenarios. And it creates less work for the teacher when the child is the one that's creating those type of props. But even greater than that, I want you to look at the language in the conversational exchange that's happening here. This is Sophia, and she tells her friend Vince that she is going on a trip and that she is going to forget how to take out her water bottle. So she's planning here. Then she explains that she won't be able to get through the security, and that Vince says that he's going to go to Puerto Rico where his grandmother lives. And so then Sophia begins and puts on her backpack and stands in line behind Vince, and now they're ready to play. So Tanya says, "Where are you going?" Sophia says, "I'm going to Puerto Rico too." Tanya says, "Okay, here's your passport, your ticket to Puerto Rico. Your flight leaves at 7 o'clock. Now, if you just take a while to look at the structure of those sentences, those are full sentences. Particularly look what Tanya is doing. Her sentence structure here is very robust and complete. When you see children speaking, do you see them putting together these complex phrases that have more than 4 words in a sentence? That's very important to think about as you're going through. Also, when you're helping children, though, with scaffolding their language, you want to think about different ways of scaffolding language. And I put in this screen here to help us think a little bit about ways to scaffold language. One thing in particular is that when you have children using very limited language, like here, where the child is pointing to a hose and they simply say water out, as a caregiver, you can build language around that by developing an expansion and saying, I'm wondering what that means. Yes, I see that water is coming out of the hose. And then you can extend it by saying the water is coming out of the hose and filling up the bucket. Let's see if the bucket's almost full. So again, your role as a teacher, when you hear children using very simple language, you can expand on that by focusing in on what it is that they're talking about, which means they already have an invested interest in accomplishing what it is that they're doing, and therefore they're more likely to listen to you when you're focused on what it is that they're focused on and building up that language. Also, be careful when you are using, for constructive play. I'm running out of time, so I want to rush up here. When you're using constructive play, make sure that you honor children's intuitions about how to use different types of manipulatives. This is a scenario where a teacher was upset because the children were using these like Lego connectors and only spinning them around these wheels. But if you look over here, the children who created the ABAB pattern over here, what they told the teacher is that it wasn't just them spinning wheels, they wanted to make the color purple. So as that wheel was spinning, it spun and it looked like purple when they were doing it. So we want to be careful to not necessarily just think that children are, honor their intuitions and how they handle those materials. And I also one of the things I've uploaded to the presentation is I talked about this in the last seminar I did, where when you are trying to build children's stamina for pretend play, you want to create props, but eventually move back on reducing those props and allow the children to start making props. I have some for children who you're trying to introduce into using pretend play where props will be necessary that you develop. This is a pretend McDonald's center where you're cutting up French fries from foam and allowing them to pretend to count different types of count out French fries, where you can imitate math that way. And also I have a game that is uploaded that's called sorting with the winning button. This is a game that really doesn't require a lot of rules, and it isn't competitive, because when you introduce competitive games in preschool, it becomes kind of a hard issue. What you'll need to do is make a color die, a shape die, and a number die. You can see them down there, and I have the card cutouts for the buttons uploaded to the EdWeb. There are 27 different buttons, and the way you play this is, I have the rules, there are 27 cards, and that there's no single button is identical. And what they're going to do is they're going to eliminate buttons by rolling each die separately. So first they roll, number 6, they roll the color die, and they eliminate all the cards that are not that color. So here you can see that red won, and so they only have the red buttons. Then they roll the shape die. They eliminate all the cards that aren't triangle, and now they only have 3 cards that are triangles. And then to figure out which one is the winning button, they roll the number die to determine which one is the in one. And you can see here that they have a red triangle with 4 holes, which allows children to develop in both in math, sorting, but also helps them to develop sentence structure as they move on. So I'm out of time. I don't know if we have time for a question and answer, but if you have, I'm very interested in answering questions. If you want to send me an email, I'm very willing to do that as well, or any sort of other questions you have. Again, I apologize for going way far into this. I know that we need to stop.
Sorry, Stephen. I can't hear you. So can you mute your mic and then unmute it, and let's see if we get your sound back? This is Regina from EdWeb. Sorry, guys. There you go. Yep.
Sorry about that, Brian. You still there? Well, unfortunately, my mic was muted when I thought it was unmuted. Brian, can you hear me now? Well, maybe we will dispense with the questions, and I'm so sorry about the technical difficulties there. So we would like to thank Brian, Dr. Brian Mulry, for this wonderful presentation. I've been reading the feed on the left-hand side, and all of you have been thrilled and have enjoyed this webinar. So we want to thank Brian once again. This is his second time with us, and this has been a fabulous, fabulous wealth of information, and I hope that a lot of you are able to take these back to your classroom and put them to great use. So you can contact Brian at bmulry@frogstreet.com, and you can also find him at the frogstreet.com website. And we would love for you to give us your feedback on this webinar. Look at the bottom of this page at tinyurl.com/edwebinar EVAL or eval. So please go there and give us your feedback on this webinar. I'm sure it will all be glowing. As I said, I've read the feed on the left-hand side, and oh my gosh, it's been amazing, the comments I've been reading. So to get your CE certificate, if you logged in live, you will, with your email address, you'll receive that within 24 hours or the next business day. If you join by phone or if you're watching the recording, you need to take the CE quiz to get your CE certificate. So join the community at edweb.net/early childhood. Then click on the image right below you to find the CE quiz. And remember, your EdWeb webinar activity is now available on your EdWeb homepage if you have already joined. And again, we encourage you to join this Early Childhood Learning Solutions community, sponsored by Frog Street Press. Again, you will receive EdWebinar recordings and slides, quizzes for CE certificates, online discussions, free resources, a lot to be gained from being a member of the Early Childhood Learning Solutions community within the EdWebinar universe. Well, that's all we have for you today. Again, we want to thank you all so much for joining us to our first back to school. This is our first webinar since the summer was ending. So we want to thank you all so much for being with us. And we will be contacting you very soon to let you know about upcoming webinars. Again, thank you, and we hope that the rest of your school year is fantastic. Bye-bye.
Bye.